Lindsey Graham, Republican Senator, 1955 to 2026. In Congress, he shifted from being an ardent Trump critic, including over his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, to being a reliable defender, supporter, and frequent golfing partner of the 45th and 47th president. Although Graham had been known for his willingness to work with Democrats on issues ranging from climate change to immigration, he later ditched those efforts and retreated to more partisan stances as political polarization grew and challenges from the right threatened his position. On foreign policy, Graham ably used flattery of Trump to remain in the president's closest circle, keeping his hawkish views relevant and at times dominant in the administration's thinking. This was most notable as he helped persuade the White House to launch a full-scale war with Iran this year. With Trump's endorsement, Graham comfortably defeated a handful of Republican primary opponents and was on track to secure a new 6-year term in the Senate in November, where he had been serving since 2003. Graham was born on July 9, 1955 in Central, a small inland town in South Carolina halfway between Charlotte and Atlanta, to a blue-collar family. His parents owned a local pool hall and restaurant. When they died in his early 20s, Graham was left to raise his much younger sister Darlene, a role he combined with attending university and a training program for the U.S. military. After graduating from law school, Graham joined the Air Force as an attorney and was later posted to Germany as its chief prosecutor for Europe. When his active duty service ended, Graham returned to private legal work in South Carolina and eventually launched his political career in the state legislature. But he would remain a reservist for years and was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan while he was a member of Congress. Graham's time on Capitol Hill began in 1995 when he joined the House of Representatives as part of the Republican wave in the midterm elections led by Newt Gingrich, a rebuke to Bill Clinton's first 2 years in the White House. He came to Washington with enthusiasm, courage, drive, and a determination to make a difference. Gingrich wrote on X on Sunday. Graham's hawkish views on foreign policy were apparent as he became a staunch supporter of a U.S. invasion of Iraq championed by George W. Bush, embracing the view that the regime in Baghdad had to be toppled. It's long past time for Saddam Hussein to be replaced. President Bush used the only reasonable option available to him in our nation, Graham said in March 2003 as the U.S. launched the war. In the Senate, he forged close relations with fellow hawks John McCain, the late Republican senator from Arizona, and Joe Lieberman, the late Democratic vice presidential candidate in 2000 and centrist senator from Connecticut, with shared views on international affairs, including staunch support for Israel. Their cross-party bond became legendary in the halls of Congress. Those who follow them know they affectionately refer to each other as the Three Amigos. My dad was the soul of the group, Joe was the heart of the group, and Lindsey was the fire and humor. Meghan McCain, the late Arizona senator's daughter, wrote on X on Sunday following Graham's death. During Barack Obama's presidency, Graham made an effort to strike a compromise with Democrats on cap-and-trade legislation to curb carbon emissions and participated in talks on a bipartisan immigration reform bill. But Graham, who was facing a serious challenge from conservative Tea Party factions to his right, retreated from both those plans, contributing to their demise. In 2015, he mounted his own campaign for the U.S. presidency, denouncing Trump as a race-baiting, xenophobic religious bigot who did not represent the Republican Party, in a CNN interview. But in a crowded field and suffering from lackluster support, Graham abandoned his bid before the Iowa caucuses after making barely a dent in the race. Graham gradually came to embrace Trump during his first term in office, and as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he helped steer the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But the January 6 attacks on the U.S. Capitol, as a group of the president's supporters stormed the legislature to stop the certification of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 election, seemed to be a tipping point for the South Carolina senator. The first thing that stands out to me is how embarrassed and disgusted I am that the United States Capitol could be taken over by domestic terrorists while we're in session, transferring power from one president to the other, Graham told reporters the next morning. Trump's actions, including a rally on the National Mall the morning of the assault, were the problem, not the solution, Graham said. But a few weeks later, the South Carolina Republican voted to acquit Trump, of any wrongdoing associated with the January 6th riot following an impeachment trial that threatened Trump's ability to hold high political office again. Trump survived and began plotting his political comeback with Graham's acquiescence. Even when Nikki Haley, a fellow South Carolinian with similar foreign policy views, and the state's former governor, launched her campaign for the Republican nomination in 2024, Graham decided to back Trump instead, cementing his loyalty to him and his camp. At the start of Trump's second term, the U.S. president clashed publicly with Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office, cementing his pressure on Kiev to settle the war with Russia in a way that would have concerned Graham. But the South Carolina senator denounced the Ukrainian president rather than Trump after the meeting, calling the episode a complete and utter disaster for Kiev. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again, Graham said at the time. But Graham then launched an effort on Capitol Hill to tighten sanctions on Russia and crack down on third countries trading with Moscow, culminating in last week's visit to Ukraine and a meeting with Zelensky. But convincing Trump to take a hard line against Iran was Graham's cause célèbre over the past 18 months, including championing the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities in June 2025, as well as this year's broader war alongside Israel. Even as the economic and political fallout from the conflict grew with no clear end in sight to the war, Graham has kept pushing for more aggressive military action. After Iran and the U.S. last month struck a pact to extend their ceasefire by 60 days and keep negotiating, a truce that had been peppered by violations and tit-for-tat strikes, Graham predicted that Trump might have to launch a full-blown war. Let's try a diplomatic solution. I think it's going to fail, Graham told CBS 3 weeks ago. I spent 4.5 hours with President Trump Friday. If this deal fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz over by force, he said. The U.S. will control the Strait of Hormuz. And if Iran contests control of the strait by the United States, we will obliterate them.